he'd always use green at the beginning of the session to try to help neutralize the person's energy field, basically, or their body. So if an area was overactive, it would bring it down. If it was underactive, it would bring it up. So, but whereas red, orange, yellow would be used to stimulate the body. So if a part of the body was underactive and underperforming, then after green, if it needed more work, then he would shine one of those more stimulating colors onto the body.
Hey, greetings everybody. So this is me once again, Medicine Muse, and I'm here today very, very happy to have Kimberly, I can't say your surname again now.
Schipke.
Schipke, here in the space with me, crowning series conversational meeting place. Kimberly is a woman that I met. I met you at the Ubuntu Festival, which was such an interesting gathering of minds and technologies, people from all over the world doing very interesting things with science and with sound and with color and light and animal communication and all sorts of things to, in an effort to really dive deeper into creating or co-creating what can I say, ohana, sangha, community, family of earth living beings and guide harmonious harmony into the space and that kind of stuff through the work. And so Kimberly was there and we connected. She came to a cacao ceremony that I served and we had an instant connection and that was great. I went to what was it called, a demonstration that she and one of her colleagues at the time did, and that was a very big experience for me. And then I said, hey, if you want to come to Cape Town and do a training, you can come to my house. I can host you. So we got to know each other better. Kimberly's a scientist, which is why I'm also so excited that she's here, because we don't get so many people who are both scientists and phenomenal healer type people who are, So Kimberly, will you introduce yourself? And I've forgotten, say also the name of your works so that people can find
you. Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you having me on your show. My background is in biomedical engineering. So I developed a cyclic pressure bioreactor to test heart valves at different pressure levels and different heart rates. And so I went the very, science route, but then I oversaw clinical trials for big pharmaceutical companies. So I was listening to the study drug versus the placebo, which is belief, and seeing all of the different side effects and how many people's faces are twitching and tongues are swollen and how many people are hospitalized, how many people died. And, this, more chemistry based, treatment method was kind of shocking and awing to me. So luckily, the company that I was working for got shut down for kind of illegal practices and started going into alternative therapies.
Wow. Can I ask you a quick question? Because I didn't know that part of your story. Did you also have the experience of seeing people become healed and stuff like that when they were just taking placebos?
Well, absolutely. There's a whole paper that they've done on the placebo effect. And, the power of belief is so powerful that the way that they organize their clinical trials has to take the belief in their mind out of it. They have to double blind the person who's taking it and the person who's doing the research study, because if one of them believes that it's working, then, or knows that it's working, then it'll work better. So they've had to, try to, really, they just showed that your mind is a very powerful thing. And
Wow.
if you believe that you're getting better, you can.
Mm.
There's people and healers who, and I've even had friends who've been just recently got out of the hospital, and they were closing their eyes and sending healing to that part of their body. And, doctors didn't think that they were going to get out of there. And, that's, with that and prayer, they believe that that is what helped them get out of the hospital. And now they're walking around Central Park in New York, and no, people didn't think that he was going to make it out of the hospital, but he believed, he knew he could.
That must have been made quite a big impact on, I would imagine, on you doing those trials and experiencing that um, as a scientist.
Well, while I was overseeing clinical trials, I had a seizure. So my heart stopped. I stopped breathing, heart stopped, everything. I had to have mouth to mouth. And they ran $10,000 worth of tests on me and $1,000 ambulance ride. And I was 21 days. I hadn't worked at the company. You got to work there for 90 days for insurance. I was 21 days from insurance. So I had like $11,000 worth of tests, and they couldn't tell me what was wrong with me. They said it could be a brain tumor, but we know you don't have insurance. Do you want to pay for a CAT scan? And I was like, no. And I signed myself out. So I ended up going up to Boulder and met with some different alternative therapies. I was like, well, if this isn't going to help me, they wanted me to take Dramamine for the rest of my life for my dizziness. And I went to Boulder and tried some alternative therapies. They were like, are you on birth control pills? And that was, I'd been on birth control pills for almost 10 years. And they were like, do you know, have this, or this? And I was like, how do you know my life? It blew my mind. Everything that he said I had. So I stopped taking them. He gave me some drops to clean up my pineal gland in my brain, because the birth control pills were kind of depositing in like residue in that part of the brain. And that's what caused me to have my seizure. So I think it's interesting that if all of the pharmaceuticals, birth control pills are called the pill. It's the pill of all pills, and it makes women, their body think that they're pregnant. So they've got hormones of a pregnant woman, which can be all over the place. So then it's like, well, why are women so crazy? It's like, well, a lot of us are probably on the pill. So anyway, so that was my journey into like, okay, well, this medicine isn't, working for me. And plus I was seeing the clinical trials for the pharmaceuticals, and I was like, definitely don't want to go that route. And so I started studying more physics based. I wanted to study more about light. I went to the World Research Foundation and learned more about spectrochrometry, and spent a month with Elizabeth Rauscher, who's a nuclear and astrophysicist, who used external electromagnetic fields to pace the heart. So she made an external pacemaker that could, like having a magnet, one on one side of a piece of glass and a magnet on the other side of a piece of glass, and you move one magnet and the other magnet follows. That's how she was able to create an external pacemaker that could help do that. So I went and studied electromagnetic fields and more about the biofield, the energy that's around the body that is invisible, that you can't see. But these electric fields with EKGs, they're measuring the electrical activity at the heart, but that electrical activity actually radiates out, and you can measure those energy fields, which isn't something that they taught very much when I was in school in bioengineering. They didn't talk. I mean, we took physics 1 through 3, and we talked, some about the electromagnetic spectrum, but not how it relates to the human body specifically in bioengineering, which, so I went on a deep dive into research. I went and spent a lot of time in India. I went and spent time with the Zoroastrians in Mumbai, the Parsi, and the Zoroastrians.
That's fascinating. The Zoroastrians.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating. I spoke at their conference several times.
What did you get from them?
Well, one of the books that they have, it's called the Sudra, and there's the divine universal laws of light and sound. I don't know if you can read that, but so I was studying a lot of their work relating to how they use sound and light, and it's been pretty fascinating.
Yeah, because that's a really old Zoroastrianism is an old thing that's
It's one of
coming
the oldest religions, yeah.
from kind of Sumeria, isn't it? Like,
Persia, originally from Persia.
yeah, wow.
Parsis, yeah.
What a fantastic thing to add into your medicine basket. Nice one.
It was wild. Yeah, it was a wild experience. They've got their Zoroastrian colleges in Gujarat and in India. So we've been there. They also have a spectrochrometry machine, which is something that is near and dear to the work that I do now with lasers. I named it the spectrochrome laser after a Zoroastrian, Dinsha Gadiali, his technique of spectrochrometry. So I'm trying to kind of keep his work moving and getting it out to the masses.
Oh, that's fantastic. I've got two questions that you might be able to weave the answer from one into the other. They might just weave nicely the answers.
Okay.
The one is, would you, or following your understanding of the biofield and all of the work that you've done with it and stuff like this, would you say that the word aura is descriptive of that same field? That's the one question. Or is it just an aspect of the biofield? And then the second question is the spectrochrome machine.
Yes.
Oh. And then your spectra laser, like, what does that mean? Spectrochrome, in terms of the biofield and the workings of stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the biofield is made of electromagnetic spectrum. So there are a lot of overlapping fields from the field of a cell to the field of a tissue to this field of an organ and the field of the human body, and then how it interacts with the fields of trees and how it's a universal consciousness field. But we're all generating and radiating these waves of energy out of our system, whether it's our heartbeat or our voice or whatever, but we're also receiving signals. So we're always kind of a receiver and a transponder and sending and transmitter and sending this energy out and around to our field. So when, these clairvoyants or clear seers, we're able to see in that visible spectrum or more into that ultraviolet, maybe just slightly outside of the normal visible range, but they could see the emanations of light radiating from a person. I know one of the first technologies that I use to study the energy field is a thermal imaging camera. And so thermal imaging is the infrared part of the spectrum. And so you can see the heat that's radiating from the body. So anybody who's ever stood next to somebody who just, finished playing a basketball game, and you can feel all of that heat that's coming off of them. It's invisible, but you can feel it. It's something that is tangible. Well, we release a lot of heat off of our head, actually. So being able to see the thermosphere of the human body, this camera was able to kind of show how this heat radiates off of the body. So even just in the thermosphere, you can see a lot more of this, like, as I said, heat that can, kind of emanate off from around the head in the thermal spectrum. So yes, aura.
That's profound, because as you said that, I could kind of almost like the camera was playing tricks with my eyes.
Well, it's like a mirage. So some of the people, what they recommend to be able to practice seeing auras are those old stereogram posters where it looks just like a bunch of fuzz that would be on TV back in the day. And then, you take your eyes out of focus, or you're looking through the stereogram, and then suddenly you can see a dolphin or giraffe, like in the picture, but normally you wouldn't be able to see, but you got to kind of play a trick with your eyes. Well, that's what people, can kind of train themselves to kind of look through a person. And then you can kind of start to see an edge or a glow on the edge of their field. And then, if you keep taking it out of focus, you might, but as soon as you try to focus on it, it'll go away. So it's kind of a process that you can do of taking your eyes out of focus and just trying to see instead of look at something. And it is kind of miragey, like the heat that you see coming off of a hot road. So you can kind of see that etheric movement of chi and energy around people if you don't try too hard.
Yeah, I do see glimpses here and there of that as well. So I can totally relate what you're saying. And then also, I mean, coming back to the biofield, what I learned when you came to my house and did a training process, and those days you were working primarily with tuning forks,
Yes.
which I still work with now as well, and I know you do too. It's fantastic to work with the metal strong as well. One of the things that also, and an aspect I think that I work very strongly with is how the biofield also speaks to other timelines and also ancestral frequencies, ancestral in the DNA stuff, and like all of that thing. So that's also very interesting to me. Do you have anything to say on that? And then weaving into the spectrosphere.
Well, I can say that, I remember when I first worked on you and I wasn't fully aware of, the work that you do with the ancestors. So yeah, working on the edges of the field and then along these kind of ancestral rivers was very powerful. But, it's interesting the kind of information and those kind of instincts or dominant traits that you can inherit from your lineage. And it's interesting also, I've done a lot of research. Once I learned how to do this tuning, I think about having a whole room of guitars and they're all tuned to the same frequency and you pluck one and they all vibrate. So I think of that with, DNA and ancestral lines. And so I'm like, well, what happens if I tune, my parents? That's the two chords of the DNA that is me. What if I tune my parents? And then my grandmother was the one who actually made the egg that became me when my mom was in her womb and her ovaries were made. So I'm like, what happens when I tune my grandmother? So I've been doing a lot of, I've tuned aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings. I've, really worked on the family dynamic, and it's really quite been profound seeing the shifts that I've seen in people, things that used to, I'd be like, oh man, that's really going to set them off, like just seeing an interaction. And I was like, wow, they're staying super calm and they're not even getting upset about it. So it's surprising how more harmonious things can become within the family once everybody starts to get tuned and resolve some of this kind of resistance in their field. And once more of this resistance is out of their field, and they can kind of go with the flow a lot more and not get phased by what somebody says or what somebody does. They can stay more solid, coherent, and grounded and not get thrown off. So I love, doing work with ancestral family because, that's a very powerful, blood connection is, so there's a resonance there, whether you like it or not. So, yep.
Okay, and then that's weaving into the spectros.
Yeah, I forgot to answer that second question earlier. So the
Yeah.
spectrophometry machine that I was saying that one of the originals that they still have at the Zoroastrian College in Gujarat was developed by Dinshaw, and what it has is a full spectrum bulb and then different colored filters that you would put in front of it, like they would do at at a movie or a theater production concert. And so these full spectrum bulb would shine different colors from red to violet, but also he had lemon lime, turquoise, and then purple, magenta, and scarlet. And so these three colors, where it's like the rainbow, these three are, he considers on the back of the rainbow, like you can't see. So these powerful colors of purple, which was used by royalty, magenta, which is worn by the Pope, and scarlet, which is often worn by the cardinals. They're very powerful colors, but it does help kind of bring that kind of, he calls it more of a toroid than just like a rainbow, somewhere over the rainbow, those magical colors. It's a really fascinating book. So when I went to the World Research Foundation back in 2009 and met Steve Ross and was asking him more about light, he'd given me these two books from the Zoroastrian, and I didn't even know that in 6 months time I was going to be in Mumbai and meeting Zoroastrians. But so this is Spectrochrometry Encyclopedia, and it's not that thick of a book, but there's a lot of really amazing information, and how he breaks down the electromagnetic spectrum numerically and as in octaves and different things like that. So this was a real eye-opener, mind-blowing book for me. And then this is the other book that Steve Ross gave me. It was called Let There Be Light. And this is a more of a how-to. So what colors you would put where and for how long. So this kind of got me started into this work. So I was, as you said, I was working with tuning forks for a really long time. I was working with coherent sound, and I wanted to get back into light. And so I started working with a green laser. So Dinshaw was working back in the 1920s and 30s, and lasers didn't get declassified by the military until the 1950s or 60s. And so he didn't even have access to, this as a light source. So green, he'd always use green at the beginning of the session to try to help neutralize the person's energy field, basically, or their body. So if an area was overactive, it would bring it down. If it was underactive, it would bring it up. So, but whereas red, orange, yellow would be used to stimulate the body. So if a part of the body was underactive and underperforming, then after green, if it needed more work, then he would shine one of those more stimulating colors onto the body. And then on the other side, if it was overactive, then he could use the blue, indigo, violet, those more kind of cooling, calmer colors to help bring that energy back down. But there were certain contraindications for red. Like if somebody's nervous system is already shot, which I think 2020 and 2021 pretty much shot a lot of people's nervous system, but the last thing you're going to need is red. I've got a friend of mine, she's got a client who keeps sitting in front of this red light because it does stimulate cell division. And so they're using it for facial and like health and beauty, but it's like green lighting their brain. And so they've been having all this issues with being agitated and anger. They were seeing red. That when my friend finally was like, please stop using that red light and try this green laser. And they couldn't believe how much their entire system changed from using red light every day to switching to green, that it really helped bring them back into balance. So it can be used to help balance your emotions, because this Dinshaw was using it to help balance the pituitary and the pineal gland. So it can really help if you're, one of my favorite ways to use it is if I think of something from the past and it still makes me really sad, or I think of something from the past and it still makes me really angry when I think about it. Being able to put the laser on my body and just think back through that memory. And so I might still feel all that charge that's in there. And then the second time I play through it, it's like, okay, I feel a little bit of charge in here. And then maybe by the third or fourth time, it might feel like, okay, that's happened. And so I don't feel, and then it stops coming back into my mind. So I'm not like constantly thinking about this thing that happened yesterday or this thing that happened 15 years ago, that I won't let go, that can. And so then when somebody were to do something or say something that was similar to one of these events, I'm going to be coming from a neutral space rather than coming from a really emotionally charged space, because, that's happened to me, 4 other times, and now you're doing it again. And I'm going to come from this, or it's like, oh, wow, you're doing this and I feel totally neutral, like I don't feel charged at all. This is amazing. So that's one of my favorites, because there's, with tuning forks, some of the work that we were doing, you could really only work up until like 3, maybe 4 years ago. And then there's this gap of like, more recent events that you can't really touch with the tuning fork. So with the laser, it kind of helped fill in that gap where, I can work on something that happened yesterday. I can work on something that just happened. And I don't have to like wait to be able to work and process through that situation. So I think also talking to my friends and like hearing like throughout the day, if we're telling stories about something, and then they remind me of something that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And I start telling, my story from that. I'm like, wow, I can feel how like electric I am really retelling this story that I haven't, thought about or talked about in a really long time. And so that's the type of thing where I'll be like, I'm going to come home and laser that when I get home. So then I grab my laser. And so that's something to just kind of bring your awareness to. So the more that I've started using the laser, the more that I'm like, oh, I'm going to go laser that, so it's been pretty amazing journey for sure.
It must have been especially amazing over this last few years to work with. I know that the from my own work that I do as well with the metals, with the forks and also the other metals. The bowl, singing bowl, is also a really amazing metal to work with, and it's kind of in some ways more gentle. It can be more gentle.
Yeah.
And I've also seen how working with the forks, for example, the what we were talking about or what we were referring to in the beginning, which is kind of could be said, the power of, I suppose, how the mind directs the process or the living experience, the mind, which we could call belief or faith, or intention or awareness, focused awareness. Like myself personally, if I'm working with a fork, then it's so important that I work with calm as well and gentleness. And because the forks can slice, they can be like swords. They're very, very strong, that sound. But I know that you've spoken to me before about what you started noticing during the hard lockdown time, and then from there, like with people you were treating and even your own nervous system and stuff like this. And so it changed some of the ways that you were working. And I'm interested for you to share a bit of that, and also where things are at now, what you're noticing, because a lot has shifted. And I feel like over this period of time, people have grown so much has opened and moved. And so I'm very interested to notice or to hear what you're noticing in the biofield, how it's responding I don't know how much you've been working with timelines. You referred to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, when we first locked down, it was pretty intense. I was still able to do some work. It was mostly in the feet, and the feet are all about, being able to, how you're going to move forward, and then, being able to step away from the old or feeling free, or do you feel stuck? So being stuck and unable to move forward, it was like I was working feet and knees. Pretty much everybody who was coming in, that's where they needed to have some work done, was in their feet and knees. But then as it's started to get a little bit more like serious now, and we're going to lock down for even longer, it started to get a little bit more intense. And there's a fork that we use. It's a 174 hertz fork that, I'd use it all the time. But it started sounding like nails on a chalkboard. And I was like, people's energy fields were just like screaming. And so I was like, this doesn't feel appropriate. And, normally we would work through as I was telling you, we'd work through a person's field. We might work through a person's timeline. It's like a needle on a record. At the edge of the field, you find information with ancestral and birth. And then you start working your way up to halfway through their life to more recent events as you get closer. But it's like there was so much that people were having to process at that time. It was like they were just trying to figure out, what are we going to do, today, or, this week or the next few days, that there was no space mentally for them to process a trauma that happened to them when they were 7 years old. or like birth trauma. Like now, that was not the time that we could be, tuning and working and bringing up and drudging up some of these old traumas in their field. So, I really would only work on clearing this space and kind of taking the pressure off of these nerve plexus here. We've got these little bundles of nerves here, and they can sometimes get electrical activity can sometimes get out of whack. So holding that coherent input for the tuning fork right in front of the throat, it allows the body to auto tune itself. So it's like somebody having a guitar that's in tune and somebody having a guitar that's out of tune. You keep giving that coherent input and the body hears where it's off and will tune itself. So when we clear the space right in front, it can really help open up the energy field, help them express, because a lot of what people were doing is they were going inward instead of being able to go outward and be like, I need to talk to somebody about this, or I need support in this. People were trying to manage all of their emotions, inwardly. So I would just kind of like help them open up and express and be grateful at their heart and shining their light in their belly and their digestion and how they're digesting what was going on in the world. So that was probably from about April, like beginning of April, end of March is when people were really starting to like, this is really getting serious. I couldn't tune anybody into their timeline for at least 7 or 8 months. It wasn't until really 2021, the beginning, it was like the next year. It's like everybody mentally like, okay, we're going to move on from this. Then I could start to, in a few people, start working. They were ready to start working through some of their trauma. But now 2022, even from like November of last year, it's like people are ready to go through anything. They're ready to drop all of it, like all their past doesn't matter. They're just letting it go. And so instead of, how we'd normally drop in, a certain amount of energy, now it's like truckloads that people are like, I'm letting it go. I don't even care. Like that happened. And I'm just going to like keep my eye on the future and like power forward and just forget all of those things. So, we've been able to clear a lot of resistance out of their field. And especially, like I said, when I add the laser together, I can shift even more, because the laser is always trying to keep the system. So when the tuning fork will trigger a trauma and there's the system goes, blah, the laser is always like, nope, let's bring that to neutral. So I'm getting a lot of more work done. But I honestly think that the people that I'm working on, at least the clients that are coming to me now, they're like, I'm ready to let it go. Like, yeah, that happened. So
yeah, that's profound. I mean, in the work that I do in the ancestral field, like mostly a lot of the work I do is in the ancestral field with whatever I'm working with folks, with whatever. I started noticing it already in 2021. Actually, like when we were in lockdown things and that kind of stuff, the few people that I was tuning, and then it got a bit more, the ancestral field started letting go. Like ancestral stuff was shifting so much easier, like it was really profound. But I mean, this not just working with folks, working also with my voice and, all of that stuff. So I think it's, not too much like sword. There's lots of different frequencies mixing together when you sing together with them as well. But it's been profound to witness how, like, prior to this, what I call this crowning period that Corona is really like exemplifying, and the Omnicron and omniscient crowning experience takes you through the hell of your emotions. Yeah, really awesome. But yeah, it's been really profound to see how easily the stuff that's not essentially ours or the client or the person's, yours, which, because it comes through the ancestral connections, has just been letting go so easily.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, the world has really come together a lot as well with this whole lockdown, watching the Italians all, singing to each other, like in the streets, and just seeing, I don't know. I feel like we've all kind of got a better grasp on what's going on around the world, whether they're putting it on the news or not. I feel like we have kind of grown as a global community. Um, there was a psychologist. His name is Glenn Martin. He's from Ohio, and we met in India. And he was explaining the evolution of consciousness of men through the chakras. So the base, obviously, being that fight or flight, just survival of the fittest, and then the sacral chakra, the better numbers, being able to have a village or kind of coming together in a group, in a community. And then the solar plexus, how eventually in that community there was, somebody who's going to be the leader, the king. And then moving on into the romantic era after, with the arts and music. And then the invention of the radio and communication, and people being able to communicate across vast distances once the radio was developed. And then the hippie movement with LSD and people's brows all getting activated and being able to see that we can have love and peace and not war, and know that it's possible. And then moving into the crown, where this is the interconnection, this is the World Wide Web, this is how you and I can talk to each other instantaneously, even though we're worlds apart. So but that was kind of his amazing, and I think he's written a book about it, but he hasn't come out with it yet, I don't think. But there's also the seven deadly sins and the seven heavenly virtues, and they also relate to the seven major chakras. And so this crown where we're at right now is all about pride versus humility. And so I think that we've been humbled. I think we have been humbled in a very, very big way. And I think that humility is the key, and that community that where we met with Ubuntu, I think that is the way to be humble,
Yeah,
and full of pride.
that
And
makes
I will
so much
go ahead.
sense. That makes so much sense. Pride and humility living in the crown.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's I do remember that session in Ubuntu where shortly we just gone to your cacao ceremony, and then I think it was just later on in the day you
Yeah.
came to that
Yeah.
session, and I remember I had offered, I got myself into this. I offered to hold space, in front for everybody in the room. And as soon as that was offered,
And there
I
was like how many people? 50,
I could
60
yeah, it was a
people in
lot.
the room, and all of their fields came and joined together with yours.
I
Yeah.
could feel them. It
Yeah.
was like boom, 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 and they were all like stacking on me in the chair. It was really, really quite profound. And some things were coming up that I hadn't, I've only told like a handful of people. So for these traumas, so like, okay. And then I, kind of out with it. And I think we started crying quite a bit, but then it was like, I was like, these weren't my tears. Like all of this was coming down my face. And I was like, these aren't, this isn't mine. So, holding space for that many people was very intense. But one thing that had never come up before in all of my tuning, and I had been getting tuned for, I think, about 9 years at that point, so almost a decade of me getting worked on. My grandpa Schipke, his death had never come up before, ever. And then suddenly we're here in South Africa, in front of all of these people, and she's like 13, sadness, grief, loss. And I just look over her like stunned, and I'm like, that's when my grandpa died. And I was just like, oh. I was like, South Africa bringing in that ancestral power, and it was really quite amazing. And I could feel you over there helping to shake and move that energy. So I appreciate you. But
Yeah, I remember that. I was blown away as well. My body was like a firecracker, and when my voice was making, like I mean, I'm a very expressive person, but it was very, very strong.
yeah.
And then now, now I'm curious because, and I'm so glad that you brought that in now because maybe your science can weave inside with this a little bit. And I'm doing this mission with the mountains. This it's another part of the crowning series called the crowning series attunements, which is where I was asked to, not working with the forks, I only worked with the forks in opening the earth star and the sun star chakras, but working with my voice, sing the song lines and essentially tune or sing the songs of each one of the chakra points that are laid out in the mountains here in the Cape of Good Hope in the Cape Peninsula, which were found by Dean Laprini as well, who was also at Ubuntu. You met him.
Yeah, I bought some of his dowsing rods.
Yeah, yeah. And basically, I was asked to ask the mountains, and they said, yes, absolutely, we agree. If they would be what you were, for all of the people if they will be or are, they've agreed, they're doing it, what you were in that room for the whole of humanity and the animals and all of the children of Gaia, if they would do that. And they agreed. So, okay,
Yeah,
Biofield.
that just made all of the hair stand up the back of my neck when you said that they would hold space like that.
Yeah, they
I mean, I
have.
can handle it. They're a lot more solid. I was kind of like shaking like a leaf and like crying. But yeah, I'm sure they'll be able to hold it down. That's very exciting. I'm really excited to see and experience that.
Yeah, I mean, as we sit here now, we are this month. They said, I was told, you know what I mean when I say that by the voice inside my head. I was told, or that comes through my heart or whatever, to release one a month. So to work through, to open the Earth star and the Sun star, and it's so great. Dean even found the Earth star, he found the feet, and then he didn't find the Sun star, but I found the Sun star, so that was fine. Um, and then to sing the song line, open a song line flowing through the rainbow body chakra system, which in these mountains it's quite cool because there's a lower heart and a higher heart space that Dean established. He pinpointed. So we worked with both, and to sing open the song line flowing on the pathway or in the order of the pathway of the rainbow labyrinth, which is a manifestation pathway, to awaken and align the wonder wisdom, to bring the wonder wisdom of the divine child frequencies that is each of us when we are perfectly in the Trinity consciousness, sacred family of the father, mother, child, masculine, feminine, child, all of that stuff. Well postured and in the human form, to following the labyrinth pathway. So it starts with the solar plexus, which of course is where the will stands up and aligns with its higher will purpose place, and intentions get spoken and sung and this kind of stuff. And now in this moon cycle, and we are inside with the solar plexus. So, and then next month we move to the next point. And so on Friday, I'm going there with a group of people and we're going to sing. And the attunement, the video and sound is already online for people to work with. But now, from the point of view of a scientist and the biofield and all of the stuff that you've observed, because I know you've got scientific observation is like super awesome. Over the years of working with the biofield actively, I know that you've also done work with the body of Earth.
Yes.
And so, yes, so I would love for you to open up some of that stuff. And if you can bring into the story weave just through your flow of intuition and consciousness, to align with what we're doing here, which also steps out of the time, because like if a person discovers this pathway in 2 years' time, it's still going to be active because, of course, the mountains are still resonating the song.
Yeah, so was, working with a friend of mine, and they had told me that there was a ley line up, or a dragon line up into the woods near their house. We drove up there and they were using dowsing rods, and they were like, okay, we found it here. Let me see if you can find it in the same spot. I said, okay, well, I'm going to come from the other way. So I came from the other side, and I got a line right here. So there was about 6 feet difference between where she found it and where I found it over here. And she's like, huh, I wonder why you found it there. I said, well, it's probably a double plasma membrane, like the magnetosphere, the heliosphere, all of these things, they all kind of have these kind of membranes. And so when I'd run the tuning fork along the edge of this line, this energy that I felt, it's like you're walking and then boom, like you're almost kind of hitting an energetic wall. And what it felt like was split ends. So it felt like it was like just kind of curling off, and the banks of the river weren't strong. So I just used the tuning fork and kind of strengthened that side while she was strengthening that side. So we were really strengthening the banks of the river. And I just set the intention and off to infinity, with this edge of the line and then to that edge of the line, so that the whole thing was getting cleared. And then we would stand in the middle and take turns striking a kind of a higher frequency fork. I think it was 528. And we were setting positive intentions, love and gratitude and compassion and courage and putting and striking that. And eventually, I don't even remember what word that we finally said, freedom. And then it went bing. And all of a sudden it sounded really reflective. And instead of like really absorbing the sound, because sometimes when you strike, it'll feel like it's just getting sucked out. Well, then this time it's just was ringing reflective and it sounded super bright. We're like, done. So then I went to India and had found some ley lines there. I had trained some people in Australia how to find ley lines and tune them. Somebody in England how to do it, and then my friend back in Vermont. So we did at some point, organize for all of us to tune one at the same time, and where we worked out the time zones, and that was really quite fun and interesting. But then also I've been able to work with lasers and be able to shine lasers down that as well, put that coherent light in that stream as well. But I was trained by David Yarrow, Yarrow. He is an amazing man, absolutely mind-blowing. And he, taught me about the difference between ley lines and dragon lines and, magnetic loops. So, there's places where it comes in and then goes along the planet, but then it comes back out and up. And so it's just a magnetic field line versus electrical lines. And then what to look for on the territory too, as far as if you see little patches of white flowers, that could be an intersection point of two lines where it's creating a spring where the energy is going to spring up. Or sometimes you'll just see a random like divot in the ground, and that is actually a place where these two lines crisscross, but it'll spiral energy down. And that's where you tend to see also ant beds. So where you find these big ant, huge things, you find that. So I've and then Dean, he taught me how if there's an energy line going through your property, you can get a piece of rebar and put it in the ground at a rose quartz, and it can jump. Depending on how far you've got to jump over your land, it's the bigger the size of the rose quartz, and it'll leap over you and hit your neighbor or whatever.
which
Yeah.
can be very helpful, because living in the middle of a river of energy can be
Yeah.
quite challenging. Yeah.
Well, that happened, once I started learning how to do that my partner, there was one going through the bed and he was in it and I was outside, like I was on the bank of the river, but he was sleeping in it all the time. And I don't know, it's probably a lot of energy for him to be processing that maybe he wasn't processing very well. But
oh gosh, we need to end now, but I'd really, really like to do another one with you just to talk about the land.
I would love, and the other one I wanted to say is I want, you had found the high heart. I wonder if you could find the unicorn point, which is one that I'd learned about with the Zoroastrians. This is that lilac or lavender color here. So maybe you might be able to find with the dowsing rod if you set the intention to find the unicorn point, because that connection between the crown and the brow can be very powerful one.
Yeah,
Just throwing it out there.
it's interesting because where the crown is actually kind of, it's in the city. That's
Mm,
where the crown spinner is, and where I found it, because Dean kind of said to me, it's between here and here, right? Um, and so we walked the path. Me and the cameraman walked the path between here and here, and along the way, where I felt it in my being the strongest, and this in the song, was right near where the city hall is, which is where the big organ is, which is where, like, and it's where the kind of old, like, it's a big gathering place, old city hall, very old stones, and I recognized those stones as pieces of the mountain, those big old stone buildings, and so they're holding the frequency now, primarily, which is awesome. So
does the building have a dome?
it has
Like,
some domed sections, yes, and on the inside it's perfect acoustics because it's built for opera. So yeah, I would like
interesting.
to sing inside there. I have to
Wow.
organize it. I don't think, backdoor. I'd like to sing it in an organized way, not just backdoor it. But yeah, yeah, I'd love to talk with you. And finding the unicorn point is a good idea at the moment, because I had to sing to the center of the labyrinth in time for the December solstice. And I
Right.
got in there on the December solstice, I entered the center. So inside with my frequencies or the song, we're in the center now, and now we're unrolling it over the next 7-8 months, because there's two hearts. So we're going to take two months to go through lower heart, higher heart. And but I know that when we come out, all of the world is going to be a different experience, all of life. And so I'll see if I can locate that unicorn point for the way out. That'll be fun. We might even need to do it before then, because, like, for example, the hara here, as it is inside of the synchronicities, there's a fence running directly between the male and female polarities. There's a division, which is interesting. And what I was told is that with the next full moon, which will be inside with the hara, rather than taking people to that place, we must go to the lower heart, no, the higher heart. We must go to the higher heart and essentially column those two places at the same time, if you like, to assist with the healing of the hara, with the higher heart. So we're not going to, yeah. It's an unfolding adventure. It's wonderful. I would love it if you joined, even at a distance.
I'd love to.
Yeah, on Friday, if you feel like tuning, if I don't know, it might be the middle of the night, but we're going to be at sunrise. We'll be at Pyramid Rock, the solar plexus, all seeing eye. If you want to join us,
Yeah, I'll do my best.
So, Kimberly, closing final words. Is there anything else that you'd like to share now in this time together?
Well, I want to thank you again. I guess if people want to know more about the work that I've done and the work that I'm doing, Biofield lab.com is my business, my website, and that's where you can find more about the thermal imaging, tuning forks, lasers, and some other equipment that I use for studying the biofield.
Beautiful. And also, you're going to find all of that information in the description below. So please do come closer to Kimberly if you would like to. And subscribe, like, share, all of those things. Explore the rest of the channel, enjoy, and have a beautiful, beautiful day, evening, morning, night, whatever time you find this.
Thank you.